At my daughter's wedding, I woke up bald. She had shaved my head and stained my dress so I wouldn't look prettier than her mother-in-law. When I showed up wearing a $53,000 wig and revealed the truth about my fortune. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I woke up bald on my daughter's wedding day. The first thing I felt wasn't panic or shock. It was the cold air against my scalp where my silver hair should have been. My hand reached up instinctively, fingers tracing the smooth skin that had been covered by thick waves just hours before. The reality hit me slowly, like stepping into freezing water. I sat up in the guest bed at Sloane's house, my reflection catching in the mirror across the room. A stranger stared back at me. At 63, I'd always been proud of my hair. It was one of the few things about aging that hadn't bothered me. Those natural silver streaks that caught the light, the way it fell just past my shoulders when I let it down. Now there was nothing. My throat felt tight as I stood, my legs unsteady. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I walked to the mirror. Up close, the damage was even worse. They hadn't just cut it, they'd shaved it completely. Not a single strand remained. On the dresser, folded neatly beside my purse, was a note in Sloane's handwriting. Sorry, Mom, but Patricia said it would be better this way. You understand, right? S. Patricia. My daughter's future mother-in-law. The woman who'd made it clear from day one that she didn't think I belonged in their social circle. I walked to the closet where I'd hung my dress the night before, a beautiful navy blue silk I'd saved for months to buy. It was the nicest thing I owned, and I'd felt genuinely pretty when I tried it on at the store. The dress was there, but it was no longer navy blue. Someone had poured white paint across the front, letting it drip down like tears. The fabric was ruined, stiff and unwearable. My knees gave out then. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the dress, trying to understand how my own daughter could do this to me. The note crinkled in my shaking hand. You understand, right? No? I didn't understand. I heard footsteps in the hallway, then Sloane's voice talking to someone on the phone. I know, but you said she couldn't look better than your mother. This was the only way. The words hit me like physical blows. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound. She was talking to Bradley, her fiancé, explaining why she'd humiliated her own mother. She'll get over it, Sloane continued, her voice getting closer to my door. She always does. Besides, it's not like she has anywhere else to go today. The footsteps faded down the hall. I sat there in the silence, feeling smaller than I had in years. Sloane was right about one thing. I didn't have anywhere else to go. My small apartment was an hour away, and the wedding started in 3 hours. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for Sloane's behavior over the years. When she was 15 and told her friends I was just the cleaning lady at her school event. When she was 22 and didn't invite me to her college graduation because she said it would be weird to have me there with her friends' parents. When she was 28 and asked me not to mention what I did for work when I met Bradley's family. Each time, I'd told myself she was just young, just embarrassed, just going through a phase. But this wasn't a phase. This was deliberate cruelty. The bathroom mirror showed me the full extent of what they'd done. Not only was my head completely shaved, but they'd been careless about it. There were small nicks near my ears, dried blood marking where the razor had cut too close. I touched one of the cuts, wincing. They'd done this while I was sleeping. My own daughter had snuck into my room and done this to me. I'd taken a sleeping pill the night before, something I rarely did, but Sloane had insisted, saying I seemed stressed and needed rest before the big day. Now I understood why. They'd needed me unconscious for their plan to work. A knock on the door made me jump. Mom? Sloane's voice was sickeningly sweet. Are you awake? We need to start getting ready soon. I couldn't answer. I couldn't even look at the door. I left you something to wear, she continued. It's not exactly what you planned, but it'll work. Patricia found something in her closet that should fit. Something in her closet. A cast-off from the woman who'd orchestrated this humiliation. Mom? Did you hear me? I cleared my throat, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I heard you. Good. I'll give you some privacy to get ready. We'll be in the kitchen when you're done. Her footsteps retreated again. I looked at myself one more time in the mirror. This woman I barely recognized, stripped of dignity, reduced to whatever version of me they thought was acceptable. But something was shifting inside me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. It started as a flicker in my chest, then grew warmer, stronger. I wasn't going to put on Patricia's cast-off dress. I wasn't going to shuffle into that kitchen with my head down, accepting their apology that would never come. I wasn't going to play the grateful, diminished mother who was lucky just to be included. For the first time in decades, I was going to do something just for me. I reached for my phone and started making calls. If Sloane wanted to play games, she was about to learn she'd been underestimating her mother for far too long. The woman in the mirror might look different, but she was done being invisible. Sitting in my car outside the luxury district, I stared at the address I'd written down 23 years ago and never thought I'd use. The paper was yellowed now, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn soft. My hands trembled as I dialed the number. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Whitmore Estate Management, this is Margaret." "Margaret, this is Rhonda Coleman, Robert Coleman's widow." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Mrs. Coleman? My goodness, how long has it been?" 23 years. "I've been managing your accounts all this time as instructed. Are you ready to access them again?" The question hung in the air between us. Was I ready? I'd hidden this part of my life so completely that sometimes I forgot it existed myself. "Yes," I said. "I need to access everything. Today." After I hung up, I sat in my car and let myself remember the life I'd chosen to forget. Robert and I had been young when we married, both from families with old money that stretched back generations. He'd been brilliant with investments, taking his inheritance and doubling it, then doubling it again. By the time Sloane was born, we owned properties in 3 states and had enough money to last several lifetimes. But money hadn't saved Robert from the heart attack that took him when Sloane was only 7. I was 35, devastated, and suddenly responsible for raising a daughter who barely remembered her father. The funeral had been overwhelming. Robert's business associates offering their condolences while clearly assessing whether I'd be competent enough to manage his affairs. My own family hovering, making suggestions about what I should do with all that money. Everyone had an opinion about how a wealthy widow should behave, but it was Sloane's reaction that changed everything. I found her in her room after the funeral, still in her black dress, surrounded by expensive toys she'd barely touched. She was 7 years old and looked so small, so lost. "Are we poor now?" she'd asked me, her voice barely a whisper. "What? No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" "Because everyone keeps talking about money, and Tommy Morrison's dad died last year, and his mom had to sell their house and move to an apartment. Are we going to have to move too?" The fear in her eyes broke something inside me. All around us, adults were discussing trust funds and investment portfolios while my daughter worried about losing her home. In that moment, I realized she was growing up in a world where love and security were measured in dollar signs. That's when I made the decision that would define the next 2 decades of our lives. I met with Margaret the week after the funeral and put almost everything into long-term trusts and investments. I kept enough for a modest life, a small house in a middle-class neighborhood, money for necessities and simple pleasures, but nothing that would mark us as wealthy. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Coleman?" Margaret had asked. "Your daughter will inherit everything eventually, but in the meantime, you'll be living quite differently than you're accustomed to." "That's exactly what I want," I'd told her. I wanted Sloane to understand the value of things. I wanted her to appreciate what she had, to work for what she wanted, to measure people by their character rather than their bank accounts. I wanted her to grow up normal. So we moved to a modest 3-bedroom house across town. I went back to school and got my teaching certificate. For 23 years, I lived as a simple elementary school teacher and single mother. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons, saved for vacation trips to the beach instead of Europe. And Sloane grew up believing we were middle class, maybe even struggling sometimes. When she complained that her friends had bigger houses or newer cars, I'd gently remind her that we had everything we needed. When she asked why we couldn't afford certain things, I'd explain about budgets and priorities. I thought I was teaching her values. I thought I was protecting her from the entitlement that destroyed so many wealthy children. I was wrong. Instead of learning gratitude, Sloane learned to be ashamed. Ashamed of our modest house, our careful budget, our simple vacations. When she got to high school and started dating boys from wealthier families, that shame turned into something darker. She began lying about our circumstances, telling friends I was a substitute teacher only temporarily, that we had money tied up in investments. She started working after school not because she needed to, but because she was embarrassed that I couldn't buy her the designer clothes her friends wore. By college, the lies had become elaborate stories. She told Bradley's family I was a retired teacher who'd downsized after my husband's death, implying we'd once had money but had lost it somehow. She never said I was poor exactly, but she painted a picture of genteel decline that was supposed to explain why I couldn't contribute much to wedding expenses or why I lived in such a small apartment. The worst part was that I'd enabled it. Every time Sloane seemed embarrassed by our life, I'd quietly absorbed the shame. When she didn't invite me to events because I wouldn't fit in, I told myself she was protecting me from uncomfortable situations. When she asked me to dress down or keep quiet about my job, I convinced myself she was just young and would grow out of it. But she never grew out of it. The shame had calcified into something harder, the belief that I was somehow lesser, that my presence in her new life was an embarrassment to be managed. Margaret's office was in a building I hadn't entered in over 2 decades. The elevator was the same. The hallway carpet was the same deep green it had always been. Even Margaret looked remarkably unchanged, her gray hair perhaps a bit more silver, her suit as crisp as ever. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, standing to greet me. "I have to say, I've been wondering when this day would come." She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. The office felt like stepping back in time. Dark wood, heavy curtains, the scent of old paper and furniture polish. "Your accounts have performed quite well over the years," Margaret continued, settling behind her desk and opening a thick file. "Your husband's initial investments, combined with the careful management you requested, have grown substantially." She handed me a portfolio summary. The number at the bottom made my breath catch. It was more than I'd expected, significantly more. "This doesn't include the real estate holdings," Margaret added quietly. "The properties have all been maintained and are currently generating rental income. There's also the original family estate in Connecticut, which has been empty but preserved exactly as you left it." I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. In trying to protect Sloane from wealth, I'd inadvertently made us wealthier than we'd ever been. "What exactly do you need today?" Margaret asked gently. I thought about the bald head hidden under my baseball cap, about the ruined dress hanging in Sloane's closet, about my daughter's casual cruelty. "I need," I said slowly, "to remember who I am." Margaret smiled. "I think I can help with that." The boutique on 5th Street looked like the kind of place I'd walked past 1,000 times but never dared enter. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a single evening gown on a headless mannequin, the price tag discreetly hidden, but the quality unmistakable. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching well-dressed women flow in and out with their distinctive shopping bags. Margaret had given me a credit card connected to my accounts and a letter of introduction to several exclusive establishments. "If you're going to do this," she'd said, "you might as well do it properly." But sitting here now, I felt like an imposter. 23 years of living modestly had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. The woman who'd once thought nothing of spending thousands on a dress felt nervous about walking into a high-end store. I touched the baseball cap covering my bald head and forced myself out of the car. A small bell chimed as I entered. The interior was all cream marble and soft lighting, with only a dozen carefully curated pieces displayed throughout the space. A woman in her 50s approached me, her dark hair swept into a perfect chignon, her smile professional but cautious. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" I could see her taking in my appearance, the baseball cap, my simple jeans and t-shirt, the way I stood uncertainly just inside the door. In the old days, salespeople would have recognized quality in my posture, my voice, the expensive watch I no longer wore. Now I looked like someone who'd wandered into the wrong store. "I need a complete outfit for this evening," I said, pulling Margaret's letter from my purse. "A wedding," Something. Significant. She glanced at the letter, and her entire demeanor shifted. Her spine straightened, her smile became genuine, and she looked at me with new eyes. "Mrs. Coleman," she said warmly. "I'm Victoria Chen, the owner." Margaret called ahead. "She said you might need our full services today." "Full services?" Victoria gestured toward the back of the store. "We have a private suite for special occasions. Hair, makeup, styling, everything you need for your event." Margaret mentioned you were working under a time constraint. I followed her through a doorway I hadn't noticed, into a room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a store. There were mirrors on 3 walls, a comfortable seating area, and racks of clothing I couldn't see from the main floor. "May I ask about the occasion?" Victoria asked as she began pulling items from the racks. "My daughter's wedding." She paused, a dress half off its hanger. "And you need a complete transformation by this evening?" "Something like that." Victoria studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. We'll take care of everything." What followed was unlike anything I'd experienced, even in my previous life of wealth. Victoria's team worked with quiet efficiency, bringing me options that ranged from elegant to show-stopping. But when they asked about my hair, I finally had to remove the baseball cap. The young stylist, Marcus, didn't even blink at my bald scalp. "Ah," he said simply. "We'll need to visit Helena." Helena turned out to be in the basement of the building, in a space that looked more like a private salon than anything connected to the boutique upstairs. She was a tiny woman with silver hair and gentle hands, surrounded by dozens of wig displays. "Victoria called down," she said in a slight accent I couldn't place. "You need something special for tonight, yes?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious again. "I know it's last minute, and probably expensive." "Money is not the concern," Helena interrupted, gesturing for me to sit in one of her styling chairs. "The concern is finding the right piece for the right moment. Tell me about this moment." Something in her voice made me pause. She wasn't asking about the wedding or the timeline. She was asking about something deeper. "I've been invisible for a long time," I said slowly. "Today, someone tried to make sure I stayed that way. I don't want to be invisible anymore." Helena nodded, her fingers gently examining my scalp. "The cuts will heal," she said matter-of-factly, "but the spirit, that takes more work. How long since you were seen? Really seen?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had looked at me and seen Rhonda Coleman, not just Sloane's mother or the nice teacher from the elementary school? 23 years, I whispered. Helena's eyes met mine in the mirror. "Then we have work to do." What she showed me next took my breath away. It wasn't just a wig. It was a work of art. The hair was human, the color a perfect silver blonde that somehow looked more natural than my original hair ever had. When she placed it on my head and began styling, I watched a stranger emerge in the mirror. "This particular piece," Helena said as she worked, "was commissioned by a woman much like you. She never came to collect it. Her daughter convinced her she didn't deserve to look so beautiful." I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was someone I remembered but had almost forgotten. Confident, elegant, worth looking at. "How much?" I asked. Helena named a figure that made me blink. $53,000. For a wig. "It's handcrafted," she explained. "Each strand individually placed. It will last for years, and no one will ever know it isn't your own hair. But more than that," she met my eyes again, "it will remind you who you are every time you see yourself." I thought about the number in my bank account, about the years I'd denied myself even small luxuries. I thought about Sloane's note. "Sorry, Mom, but Patricia said it would be better this way." "I'll take it," I said. 2 hours later, I stood in Victoria's private suite looking at a woman I barely recognized. The wig was perfection, styled in soft waves that framed my face beautifully. The dress Victoria had chosen was midnight blue silk with subtle beading that caught the light when I moved. It was sophisticated without being flashy, expensive in a way that whispered rather than shouted. "The jewelry?" Victoria asked, holding up several options. I shook my head. "I have something." From my purse, I pulled out a jewelry box I hadn't opened in decades. Inside were my grandmother's pearls, a simple strand that had been in our family for 4 generations. When I fastened them around my neck, the transformation was complete. "Mrs. Coleman," Victoria said softly. You look magnificent. I turned to study myself in the three-way mirror. The woman reflected there was someone I remembered from long ago. Someone who belonged in beautiful spaces, who commanded attention simply by existing. Someone whose presence mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Sloan. Where are you? The wedding starts in an hour, and you're supposed to be here getting ready. I looked at the message, then at my reflection, then back at the message. For 23 years, I'd responded to every summons, answered every demand, accommodated every request. I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I'd nearly disappeared entirely. Not today. I typed back, I'll be there. But I wouldn't be the woman she expected. I wouldn't be the grateful, diminished mother who accepted whatever scraps of dignity they chose to throw my way. Victoria handed me a small clutch that perfectly matched my dress. One more thing, she said, pulling out a compact mirror. Remember this feeling. Remember how it feels to honor yourself. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror. This woman who'd been hiding inside me for over 2 decades, who'd finally been allowed to emerge. I won't forget, I said. As I walked to my car, I could feel people noticing me. Not staring rudely, but the kind of subtle attention that comes when someone commands respect simply by how they carry themselves. I'd forgotten what that felt like. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Patricia, Sloane's future mother-in-law. Dear Rhonda, I hope you understand that everything we did was for the good of the family. A mother sometimes has to sacrifice for her daughter's happiness. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Patricia was about to learn that this mother was done sacrificing. The country club parking lot was filled with luxury cars, each one worth more than I'd pretended to make in a year as a teacher. I sat in my modest sedan for a moment, watching guests in expensive clothes making their way toward the entrance. This world had once been mine, but walking away from it had been so complete that returning felt surreal. Through the windows, I could see the ceremony set up on the back lawn. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway draped with cascading flowers that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything was elegant, tasteful, and exactly what Patricia would have chosen to showcase her family's status. I checked my reflection one more time in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was still a shock. Polished, sophisticated, beautiful in a way that commanded attention. The $53,000 wig moved like real hair, catching the late afternoon light with subtle highlights that seemed to glow. My hands were steady as I gathered my clutch and stepped out of the car. I'd made a choice in that boutique, and there was no going back now. The moment I entered the club's lobby, conversations began to shift. I could feel the ripple of attention as people noticed me, first glances, then longer looks, then whispered questions. Who was this woman? She looked familiar, but different somehow. Rhonda? I turned to find Janet Morrison, an old acquaintance from Sloane's school days. Her eyes were wide with surprise. Janet, how nice to see you. Wow. She seemed to be struggling for words. I almost didn't recognize you. You look absolutely stunning. Thank you, I said simply, not offering the self-deprecating deflection that would have been my automatic response before today. Is that a new hairstyle? It's gorgeous. I touched the perfect waves framing my face, something like that. As we talked, I noticed other people beginning to take notice. The kind of subtle attention I'd forgotten existed. The way conversations paused when I passed. The way eyes followed me with curiosity rather than pity or dismissal. Rhonda Coleman? I turned to find William Bradford, Patricia's brother-in-law, approaching with a look of genuine surprise. William was old money through and through, the kind of man who could assess someone's social standing with a single glance. William, what a pleasure. He took my hand in the formal way of his generation, his eyes taking in everything. The quality of my dress, the understated elegance of my jewelry, the confident way I carried myself. I must say, you look remarkable this evening. That dress is exquisite. Thank you. You're very kind. Patricia mentioned you were. He paused delicately. Between circumstances recently. I hope things have improved. I smiled, understanding exactly what he was fishing for. Patricia had clearly painted a picture of me as a woman down on her luck, grateful for any kindness from their family. "Oh, circumstances change," I said lightly, sometimes quite dramatically. Before he could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared, guiding guests toward their seats. I followed the flow of people through the club's French doors and onto the manicured lawn. That's when I saw Patricia. She was holding court near the front of the seating area, resplendent in a champagne-colored mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost more than my teacher's salary used to be in a month. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry substantial but tasteful. She was everything a society matron should be, until she saw me. The look that crossed her face was worth every penny I'd spent that afternoon. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like panic. She excused herself from her conversation and began moving toward me with purpose. "Rhonda," she said when she reached me, her voice carefully controlled, but her eyes sharp with something between anger and confusion. "You look different." "Thank you, Patricia. You look lovely as well. The flowers are beautiful." She studied my face intently, clearly trying to understand what had changed. The wig was flawless. She couldn't possibly know about my shaved head, but the confidence, the posture, the quality of my clothing, all of it was wrong according to the narrative she'd constructed. "That's an interesting dress," she said finally. "Very expensive looking." "It's adequate for the occasion," I replied, borrowing the understated language of real wealth that she would recognize. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. Around us, other guests were beginning to take their seats, but several were still watching our interaction with curious eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," Patricia continued, after this morning's incident. "Incident? Well, you seemed so upset about the dress situation. Sloan was worried you might not feel comfortable attending. The audacity of it took my breath away. They'd destroyed my clothes and shaved my head. And she was framing it as me being overly sensitive about a dress situation. "I'm exactly where I belong," I said calmly. "At my daughter's wedding." Before Patricia could respond, there was a commotion near the back of the seating area. I turned to see Sloan approaching, still in her pre-ceremony outfit but clearly agitated. She'd been beautiful as a child, and she was beautiful now. Blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, her makeup professionally done, but her face was tight with worry. She stopped short when she saw me, her mouth actually falling open. "Mom?" The word came out as barely a whisper. She looked me up and down, taking in every detail of my transformation. I could see her mind working, trying to reconcile the woman in front of her with the bald, humiliated mother she'd left behind that morning. "Hello, sweetheart. You look beautiful." What? How did you?" She seemed unable to form a complete sentence. Other guests were definitely watching now. The mother-daughter reunion was drawing attention, especially with my dramatic change in appearance. "Where did you get that dress?" Sloan finally managed. "I went shopping." "Shopping? But you said you couldn't afford." She caught herself, glancing around at the listening guests. "Circumstances change." I repeated the phrase I'd used with William, enjoying the way it seemed to unsettle both Sloan and Patricia. Patricia moved closer, lowering her voice. "Rhonda, perhaps we should discuss this later. The ceremony is about to begin." "Of course," I agreed. I should find my seat. I began moving toward the chairs, but Sloan caught my arm. "Mom, wait, we need to talk. After the ceremony, sweetheart. This is your special day." I could see the panic in her eyes. The narrative she'd constructed for Bradley's family, the struggling single mother, the woman who needed their charity and patience, was crumbling in real time. The woman standing before her in a $5,000 dress and $50,000 hair was not someone who could be dismissed or managed. "Mrs. Coleman?" I turned to find Bradley approaching, handsome in his tuxedo but looking confused. He'd clearly been sent to investigate the disturbance. "Bradley, congratulations. I'm so happy for you both." He shook my hand, his eyes taking in my appearance with the same confusion I'd seen in everyone else. "You look amazing, really different." "Thank you. I felt like celebrating today." "I'm sorry. I have to ask. That hair color is incredible. Did you just have it done?" I touched the perfect waves, fighting back a smile. "Something like that." Patricia appeared at Bradley's elbow, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Bradley, darling, we should get you to your position. The ceremony will begin soon. But Bradley was still studying me with curiosity. I have to say, Mrs. Coleman, you look like a completely different person from this morning. The comment hung in the air. Patricia's face went white, and Sloane made a small, choked sound. This morning? I asked innocently. Bradley looked confused. Well, Sloane said you had some kind of incident with your hair and dress, that you were upset and might not make it to the wedding. I looked at Sloane, whose face had gone from pale to red. Around us, several guests had stopped pretending they weren't listening. Oh, that, I said lightly. It worked out beautifully in the end. Sometimes what seems like a setback is actually an opportunity. I could see Patricia frantically trying to signal Sloane to end this conversation, but it was too late. The damage was done. Too many people had heard too many inconsistent stories. Well, I said, glancing at my watch, I should let you finish preparing. I'll just find my seat. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Behind me, I heard Patricia's urgent whisper. What exactly did you tell him about this morning? I found my assigned seat, not in the family section where I belonged, but several rows back with distant relatives and family friends. Another small humiliation that would have devastated me this morning but felt insignificant now. As I settled into my chair, the woman beside me leaned over. Excuse me, but you look absolutely radiant. That hairstyle is perfection on you. Thank you, I said, smoothing the silk of my dress. I'm feeling quite myself tonight. And for the first time in 23 years, that was completely true. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Sloane looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, though I caught her glancing in my direction several times with an expression I couldn't quite read. Bradley was clearly smitten, his face lighting up when he saw his bride. For a moment, watching them exchange vows, I almost forgot about the morning's cruelty. Almost. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Patricia actually turned to look at me, as if expecting some kind of disruption. I simply smiled serenely and watched my daughter promise to love and honor the man she'd chosen. The real test came at the reception. The club's ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a masterpiece of white roses and gold accents. It was the kind of wedding that would be featured in magazines, the kind that announced a family's social standing to everyone who mattered. I was seated at table 12, far from the family tables but strategically placed where I could observe everything. My table mates were pleasant enough, distant relatives and old family friends who remembered me vaguely from Sloane's childhood. Rhonda, dear, you look absolutely wonderful, said Martha Hendricks, an elderly woman who'd known Patricia for decades. That dress is stunning. Is it new? Thank you, Martha. Yes, it's new. Well, it's gorgeous. Very elegant. You have excellent taste. From across the room, I could see Patricia holding court at the main family table, but her usual commanding presence seemed strained. She kept glancing in my direction, and I could see her having urgent whispered conversations with other family members. The first real confrontation came during cocktail hour. I was talking with William Bradford about the club's recent renovations when Patricia appeared at my elbow. Rhonda, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Of course. She led me to a quiet corner near the bar, her smile never wavering, but her grip on my arm uncomfortably tight. I think we need to clear the air about this morning, she began, her voice low but intense. There seems to be some confusion about what happened. Is there? Yes. People are asking questions, and Sloane is upset. You've clearly misunderstood the situation. I looked at her carefully. Even now, after everything, she was trying to rewrite the narrative. What situation would that be, Patricia? The hair situation was an accident. Sloane was trying to help with a styling issue and things went wrong. And the dress, well, that was unfortunate. But these things happen. There's no need to make it into something dramatic. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd shaved my head while I slept and destroyed my dress, and she was calling it styling help and an unfortunate accident. I see, I said calmly. And you think I've misunderstood something? I think you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Sloane loves you, Rhonda. We all do. but sometimes you can be sensitive about these things. There it was, the gaslighting I'd been accepting for years without even recognizing it. Every time they'd hurt me, diminished me, excluded me, it had been reframed as my being too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. "Patricia," I said, my voice still calm but carrying a new edge, "I want you to listen to me very carefully." Something in my tone made her step back slightly. "I am not confused about what happened this morning. I am not being emotional or dramatic, and I am definitely not too sensitive. What happened was deliberate cruelty, and we both know it." Her face flushed. "How dare you? I'm not finished." The words came out with a quiet authority that surprised us both. "For years, you've made it clear that you don't think I'm good enough for your family's social circle. You've encouraged my daughter to be ashamed of me, to minimize my presence in her life, to treat me like an embarrassment to be managed. That's not true." "It is true. And this morning was simply the logical conclusion of that attitude. You decided I needed to be put in my place, reminded of my position in the hierarchy you've created." Patricia looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. Several people were glancing in our direction, clearly sensing the tension. "Lower your voice," she hissed. "No." The word came out firm and final. "I'm done lowering my voice. I'm done making myself smaller for your comfort." I stepped closer, and she actually backed up against the wall. "You made one critical mistake, Patricia. You assumed you knew who I was. You saw what I chose to show you and thought that was all there was." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Deep down, you know you've been cruel to someone you should have respected, and now you're discovering that person has more resources than you calculated." The color drained from her face. "What are you saying?" Before I could answer, Sloane appeared beside us, her wedding dress rustling as she moved quickly across the room. "What's going on here?" she demanded, looking between her mother-in-law and me. "We're just having a conversation," I said calmly. "Mom, people are staring. You're making a scene." There it was again. My fault for responding to their cruelty, not their fault for being cruel. Am I? "I'm simply talking to Patricia about this morning's events." Sloane's face went white. "You don't need to discuss that with everyone." "Everyone?" I looked around the room. "I'm discussing it with the person who orchestrated it." "Mom, please. Not here. Not tonight." For the first time, I heard something in Sloane's voice I'd never heard before. Not anger or embarrassment, but fear. She was afraid of what I might say, what I might reveal. "You're right," I said finally. "Tonight is about celebration. Let's not let unpleasant topics spoil the mood." Relief flooded both their faces, but I wasn't finished. "However, I do think it's time people knew the truth about a few things." The fear returned to Sloane's eyes. "What truth?" I looked at my daughter. This woman I'd sacrificed everything for, who'd grown up believing I was someone to be ashamed of, and made a decision that had been building for 23 years. The truth about who I really am. During dinner, as the speeches began, I watched Sloane and Patricia exchange increasingly worried glances. They could sense something had shifted, but they didn't know what I was planning. When it came time for the traditional mother of the bride speech, which had been given to Patricia instead of me, I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I believe there's been an oversight." The room quieted. All eyes turned to me, this elegantly dressed woman who'd been relegated to a back table, but was now commanding attention. "I'm Rhonda Coleman, Sloane's mother, and I'd like to say a few words about my daughter." I could see Patricia frantically shaking her head, could see Sloane's face going pale, but it was too late. The microphone was being handed to me, and 200 wedding guests were waiting to hear what I had to say. 23 years ago, I began, my voice steady and clear, I made a decision that I thought would give my daughter the best possible life. I chose to live modestly, to prioritize values over wealth, to teach her that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. I paused, letting that sink in. Several people at the family table were frowning, clearly confused by where this was going. I wanted Sloane to grow up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of character, the beauty of a simple life well lived. So I made sacrifices. I lived quietly. I let people assume things about my circumstances that weren't necessarily true. Sloane was staring at me with growing horror, beginning to understand what I was about to reveal. But sometimes, I continued, when you hide who you are for too long, people forget to treat you with basic respect. They begin to see you as less than you are, rather than different than they expected. I looked directly at Patricia, then at Sloane. Tonight, looking at my beautiful daughter and her new family, I realized it's time to stop hiding. Time to let people see the whole truth. The room was completely silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Sloane, sweetheart, I love you more than life itself. Everything I did was to protect you from the entitlement and shallowness that often comes with wealth. But in protecting you, I allowed you to become ashamed of me. That was my mistake. I set the microphone down and looked around the room one last time. I hope you'll all understand that from now on, I'll be living a bit more honestly about who I am. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, applause began, tentative at first, then stronger. Not everyone understood what had just happened, but they recognized a moment of truth when they heard it. As I walked back toward my table, I passed Patricia. Her face was ashen, but her eyes were sharp with understanding. She knew exactly what I'd just done. The game had changed completely. 6 months later, I stood in the sunroom of my new home, watching the morning light filter through the tall windows overlooking the garden. The house was everything I'd forgotten I wanted. Elegant but comfortable, spacious but warm, filled with beautiful things that had meaning rather than just price tags. It hadn't taken long for the truth to spread through Patricia's social circle after the wedding. Within a week, everyone knew that the struggling single mother they'd been condescending to was actually one of the wealthiest women in the state. The revelation had sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed social hierarchy. Some had been embarrassed by how they'd treated me. Others had tried to suddenly become my best friend. A few, like William Bradford, had simply nodded knowingly and said they'd always suspected there was more to my story. Patricia herself had disappeared from social events for nearly a month, too humiliated to face the people who'd witnessed her cruelty to someone she now knew could buy and sell her family several times over. But the most complicated relationship had been with Sloane. She'd tried calling the day after the wedding, her voice tight with panic and anger. "Mom, what have you done? People are asking questions I can't answer. Bradley's family thinks I've been lying to them." "Have you been lying to them?" I'd asked calmly. "That's not the point. You've made me look like a fool." It had taken 3 more months of difficult conversations before she began to understand that I wasn't the one who'd made her look foolish. Her own shame and dishonesty had done that. Now, she sat across from me in my new living room, cradling her 3-month-old daughter, my granddaughter Emma, whom I'd been allowed to hold from the moment she was born. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sloane began, her voice softer than it had been in years. "About teaching me values." I looked up from the baby blanket I was knitting, waiting for her to continue. "I understand what you were trying to do. I really do. But I think I needed to know the truth earlier. I needed to understand that being wealthy doesn't make you shallow, just like being poor doesn't make you noble." She paused, adjusting Emma in her arms. I was ashamed of the wrong things. I should have been ashamed of being ungrateful, of taking you for granted, of letting Patricia treat you badly. Instead, I was ashamed that we didn't have more money, bigger houses, fancier clothes. It was the most insightful thing she'd said since she was a child, and it gave me hope. "The money was never the point," I said gently. "The point was learning to value people for who they are, not what they have." "I know that now, but Mom," she hesitated, then looked directly at me. "What they did to you that morning, Patricia and I, that was unforgivable. I keep thinking about you waking up like that, how you must have felt." The memory still stung even months later, but it had also been the catalyst for everything that followed. "It was cruel," I agreed, "but it also freed me from pretending to be someone I wasn't." Sloane nodded, tears in her eyes. "I want Emma to know her grandmother, the real one. Not the version I created because I was too immature to appreciate what I had." She paused, then added quietly, And I want to learn to be the kind of daughter you deserved to have. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but it was a beginning. Later that afternoon, after Sloane and Emma had left, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret knocked on my door, her professional composure giving way to a knowing smile when I answered. "Mrs. Coleman, I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but I had some papers for you to sign, and I wanted to see how you were settling in." I led her to the study where we'd been managing the transition back to my former life. The room was lined with books, many of them treasures I'd kept in storage for decades. "The foundation is almost ready to launch," Margaret said, spreading documents across my desk. "Are you certain about the focus?" I nodded. For months, I'd been planning the Rhonda Coleman Foundation for women over 50 who wanted to restart their lives. Not a charity, but a resource center, helping women who'd spent decades caring for others learn to pursue their own dreams. "I spent 23 years hiding who I was," I said. "I know I'm not the only woman who's made herself invisible for what she thought were good reasons." Margaret smiled. "It's a worthy cause, and the board members you've selected are impressive." I'd been careful about that. No one who'd treated me poorly when they thought I was powerless. No one who was only interested now that they knew I was wealthy. Just people who understood the value of second chances and authentic relationships. As Margaret gathered her papers, she paused. "If you don't mind me asking, do you have any regrets? About the years you spent living modestly, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. Did I regret those years of teaching, of living simply, of watching every penny? "No," I said finally. "Those years taught me things I needed to know. They showed me who would value me for myself and who would only respect me for my money. They taught me the difference between dignity and status." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd started planting roses, something I'd always wanted to do but never had space for in my small apartment. The mistake wasn't living simply. The mistake was thinking I had to choose between being authentic and being wealthy. I thought money would corrupt Sloane, so I hid it completely. Instead, I should have taught her how to handle wealth responsibly. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "And now? Now I'm living honestly. I'm not hiding my resources, but I'm not flaunting them either. I'm using them purposefully." After Margaret left, I spent the evening in my study, responding to emails from women who'd heard about the foundation and wanted to know more. Their stories were achingly familiar. Women who'd spent decades defining themselves through their relationships to others, who'd lost themselves in the process of caring for everyone else. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Janet, a 60-year-old recent divorcee who'd just discovered her husband had been hiding assets for years while she lived on a strict budget, believing they had no money. "I don't know who I am anymore," she wrote. "I don't know what I like, what I want, or even what I'm capable of. I've been playing a role for so long that I've forgotten the woman underneath." I understood that feeling completely. As I was drafting my response, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't spoken to in months. "Patricia." I hesitated, then answered. "Rhonda." Her voice was carefully controlled, formal. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Hello, Patricia." I wanted to. I needed to call, to apologize. The words hung in the air between us. Patricia Bradford didn't apologize easily or often. "I've had time to think about what happened," she continued, "about how I treated you. It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was." She was silent for a moment, perhaps expecting me to make it easier for her, to offer quick forgiveness that would absolve her guilt. I didn't. "I want you to know that I understand now. What I did, what we did, it was cruel. There's no excuse for it." "No, there isn't." Another pause. "Is there anything I can do to make amends?" I thought about it seriously. Patricia had humiliated me, encouraged my daughter to be ashamed of me, tried to erase me from what should have been one of the most important days of my life. "Yes," I said finally. "You can treat the next person with respect, regardless of what you think their circumstances are. You can remember that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account or social status." "I will. I promise I will." And Patricia? If you ever treat my daughter the way you treated me, if you ever make her feel ashamed of who she is or where she comes from, you'll discover that I have resources beyond just money. The warning was clear, and we both knew I meant it. After I hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and returned to the sunroom. The evening light was fading, but the garden still glowed with late roses and early autumn colors. For the first time in decades, I was living as myself, completely, honestly, without apology. I had my money back, but more importantly, I had my dignity back. I had a relationship with my daughter that was based on truth rather than shame. I had a granddaughter who would grow up knowing her grandmother as a woman of substance and strength. The woman who'd woken up bald and humiliated 6 months ago was gone. In her place was someone I'd almost forgotten existed, Rhonda Coleman, in all her complicated, powerful, authentic glory. And for the first time in 23 years, that was exactly who I wanted to be. I picked up my phone and looked at Janet's email again. Tomorrow, I would call her and tell her what I'd learned, that it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to reclaim your life. And it's never too late to stop making yourself small for other people's comfort. The sun set behind my roses, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I sat in my beautiful home, surrounded by beautiful things that belonged to me, planning beautiful work that would help other women find their way back to themselves. It had taken 63 years, but I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. The only person's approval you truly need is your own. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.